Alright, I know it's been a while since I've posted a video other than idling in that death wine video, but I've actually been doing a whole lot of work, relatively speaking, for me in the past, whatever it's been, couple months. You could see there's, well, whatever. There's junk everywhere because I've been doing a lot even today. So I wanted to show you everything that I have been doing and everything that is in progress of being done. The problem with taking these videos is that I come out to the garage for a little bit at a time, so I work on this sporadically throughout random days, right? So if I were to take a video, it would be of a half hour's worth of work. It wouldn't be too much. So I've compiled a bunch of stuff that I've done, and I will show it to you right now and let you know what is in the works as well. So here goes. All right, first and foremost, at the end of the last update video, I said that I was going to be finishing exhaust stuff, and I did. Not a whole lot more to say about that, but the exhaust is up and going. I do have to add one clamp right there because the exhaust is leaking into, or it's just leaking out right there and making my eyes water when I'm trying to drive that thing. But I did complete the exhaust. Next, I did some brake work. I had to bleed the lines. I was having a lot of issues with brakes, the brake lines leaking and everything, but I was able to finally get that solid and then bled the brakes. I also put on I had a set of second gen brakes, and I had already put the second gen front brakes on, but I went ahead and put the second gen rear brakes on as well. I also, I don't know if this is going to show up. Probably not. Let's try this. You can kind of see it, but I got a one-piece drive shaft. If you look at the top, you can see that black line. Got a one-piece drive shaft. I ordered that, got it in. Fits well enough. I ordered it about 1.5 inches too short, but it still has plenty of input on the drive shaft there, so we're good. So that has worked out fantastic. Also, I did stuff that's not necessarily vital to the build, but when a car is sitting this long, it's hard to stay motivated, right? So some of the things that I did was work on the aesthetics. So you could see right there, I got a 96 spoiler, which was a really cool find. Those are going up in value like crazy, but I did get the 96 spoiler. I also have, well, I guess I'll go here. I had a set of blinkers that were trashed from a 99, and I started to, they're almost done, started to mold them to, or just modify them to fit the Stealth bumper. So I've got the 99 headlights and turn signals. Now you can see how trash they were. I had to fix them up a little bit, and I'll be painting them, and I'll probably have to, unfortunately, tint them, but that's because there's a lot of stuff inside that kind of looks like crap. But I'll paint this outside gray and tint them over a little bit, and hopefully that'll disguise everything. But I think that turned out pretty cool once I get that seal down there. That looks good though. And for those of you that don't know, the 99 blinkers are for the 3000 ET, so they come to here and go up. That part of my bumper's kind of foobar. So got the 99 blinkers and headlights. What's next? I did some work on the interior. I don't know if there's much to see from the last video. It's still kind of bare because I was doing some other stuff, but I guess you just gotta trust me. I did some work in there. I have also replaced the shocks on front and rear. I had all of my shocks were blown basically, and I replaced all those. You can see my ground control coilovers. I had it on the ground and I measured, it wasn't completely even all the way around, so I have it measured on how much I want to raise or, well, just lower each corner so that it sits level and a little bit lower than what it was. I have perfect ground clearance, so I'm able to sit it as low as I want, just like from a factory setup, basically. Let's see. Actually, I don't think this front bumper was actually painted last time. I mean, you've seen it, I'm sure, in maybe walk around videos or idle videos, but I went ahead and painted that. This is kind of a, I'm not it looks worse on camera actually than it does in person, as far as how crappy it looks. It actually looks pretty solid. But what's crazy is if you look at, so this is a 2nd gen hood, and with that bumper, and again, this is showing up worse on camera. It's even better in person, but I painted that with this. That's it. Gloss apple red. So I had some color matching paint, and what I was going to do, there you go, there's a pretty good representation of the color. What I was going to do was paint, probably, I mean, this isn't ideal. I was going to prep the bumper, and then I was going to do a base coat with that. And then, because I didn't have enough color matching paint, that fancy spray paint that you can buy that's already color matched, and I'm stupid, and that's what I was going to do. And I painted it, and I'm like, holy crap, this color is 98% identical. And I'm guessing that even if I put a clear coat over it, it'll be even better. But I went ahead and prepped that bumper. It was complete garbage, and I think it turned out pretty good, personally. And, you know, in the future, it'll get a proper paint job. It's not perfect anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, I'm really happy with that. So it's kind of a mismatch, is my garbage paint job that turned out decent. That's a, you know, 1st gen fender, 1st gen stuff, and then 2nd gen hood and side skirts, and then the 96 spoiler, which is already red. So that's pretty cool. So the car's looking pretty decent. I'm you know, once it is all cleaned and waxed and polished, it'll be decent enough. So let's see, I went over that. Little small thing, I got the power windows working. They weren't working. That was just a relay issue. And then after that, the big one, cooling system. This I have done. Well, yeah, I would say done. So I had to get a new thermostat because I had gotten it all ready and started it, and the thermostat never opened. So O'Reilly actually stocks 160-degree thermostats, so I was able to go there and get that for whatever it was, $10, and got everything topped off, have it all bled and everything. I had there's some stupidness there, but I had you know, there's a fan wire coming off the ECU, and I can tune that to whatever I want, but it wasn't tripping the relay, so I don't know what was going on with that. So I just rigged up a little switch here for now. I'll worry about it being proper later. But that being said, if you ignore that, completely done. Everything works. The fans work. It holds temperature. Cooling system is done enough. I'm still going. After that, so I had a video talking about the death wine, right? And I was like, uh-oh, what the heck is going on? Well, I'm so sick of delaying everything that I just said, screw it, I'm just going to send it and just keep going and see what happens. And the wine went away. So I'm thinking it was either like the clutch, or maybe just this engine that had been sitting for a while. Maybe one of the pulleys was making noise. I thought it was the alternator at first, but that wasn't it. So we're good there. And next, you saw in my idle video tuning, I went ahead and got HP tuners, and there's that thing right there, that's HP tuners. So I got that and started to tune out the idle, at least, and throttle response, and that worked great. And I could also get rid of all the codes and the vehicle anti-theft system and stuff. So I did start that tune. I haven't tuned a vehicle yet, or in the past. You know, it's not rocket science, but it's something I'm still learning. I figured I would start with getting this, it's heads cam intake, so I figured I would get it idling first and then go from there. So throttle response and idling is good. After that, I drove it. I drove it a couple miles. Sorry I didn't get that on video, but I drove it a couple miles and, of course, ran into some issues. One of them was I had some crazy clanking going on down here. I thought it was the drive shaft hitting the tunnel, and I messed with a few things, went back out, and it still made that clank. And it turns out it's the exhaust right here hitting my subframe. Simple enough. And I'm glad it wasn't anything serious. So I still have to fix that, though. I'm just gonna beat the heck out of the exhaust until it clears it. It's dented. The steering, here's the biggest debacle yet. the steering is horrendous. You know what? I'll talk about that in a minute. I don't want to get into that just yet. When I'm talking about what I'm going to be doing next, let's see, I got a list here. Yeah, okay, you know what? Let's just go ahead and get into that. First and foremost, well, not first and foremost, but one thing I am doing now is the brakes were sticking a little bit while I was driving. It was a pretty awful experience driving this thing, I'm going to be honest. But the brakes were sticking, and it was the front brakes, not the rear brakes. They were warm, and I could barely spin them. And once I was just assuming, and I think my assumption was correct, that the brake pad, or the brake pads were worn just a little bit, but I think that the pistons sort of seized up at that spot. So they would go in, but they wouldn't recess all the way back. So I just went ahead and got new brake pads, changed those out, and cleaned it up as best as I could. And obviously when you change the brake pads, you open the pistons all the way. So I'm hoping that just sort of self-heals. I'm thinking that's what's going to be the case, but obviously we'll see. But it's got new brake pads. So I'm doing that, and the ball joints I'm going to do as well, because they are absolutely trashed. So those are two things, and then now it's time to talk about steering. All right, so yeah, I drove it a couple miles. I already talked about the exhaust clanking, the brakes were sticking. Also, I'm hoping it's just a clutch bleeding issue, but it would have to be. But I can't rev over 2,000 RPMs in shift because it grinds like crazy. I'm hoping that I can just bleed the clutch more, or maybe it's a pedal adjustment. I'm not really sure. I haven't dug into that yet. I tried to do a vacuum bleed from the reservoir, but that was garbage. That did literally nothing. I've never been able to successfully do that. I've looked at a few other things that people do from the top, but I haven't. So I'm going to try to bleed the clutch, which is kind of a pain because I don't have a quick bleeder on these T56s. They're pretty annoying, but whatever, we'll do that. Yeah, so I keep delaying. Let's talk about steering. Like I said, it was a miserable experience. So the steering on this car is really heavy. Obviously, I knew it was going to be heavier. I have a manual Mustang 2 rack on it, and it has little extenders, inner tie rod extensions, so that the steering geometry with the suspension is not foobar. Corrects bump steer, all that kind of stuff. I knew it was going to be a little bit tougher. I've driven manual steering vehicles before, but this one was awful. I'm thinking that it is because, well, maybe a combination of things, but I think that the biggest reason why is the steering arms that I created coming off the hub are relatively close. So it doesn't have leverage on its side. So relatively close to the center. I don't know. I hope this is making sense. But it doesn't have a lot of leverage going for it. So not only is this manual steering, but it doesn't have a whole lot of leverage to help move the wheel. And it made it really hard. Even when kind of moving forward, it was kind of hard. I also, after I stopped, I'm an idiot, and I just did a parking lot alignment. But what I ended up doing was basically shifting the whole steering rack to one side, so it turned really, really sharp to the right, and it hardly turned at all to the left. So I'm an idiot. That being said, and I'll probably get some flack for this, but I am changing the steering entirely. I'm putting power steering in it. It is that awful. So I'll go ahead and show you what I'm doing right now. That is one of the things. So I'm doing the ball joint, adjusting the suspension, the brakes I did. I don't know, I'm in the middle of a couple things. But the steering is the big one, and I'll show you what I'm doing with that. All right, the steering. So what I had was, I guess what I had was, you like my socks with sandals there? Yeah. A Mustang 2 manual rack. And I believe I mentioned this earlier. I knew it was going to be, it's a manual rack. It's going to take more effort to move or to steer, but it was a little bit too much for reasons I explained with the pivot point versus the steering arm location, and that just wasn't acceptable. So this may not be popular, but because I'm sure people are saying, hey, just get that junk on the road and don't worry about this, but it really made the driving experience pretty awful. It was really, really hard to turn. So what I did was I got a steering rack, power steering rack, of course, that fits an 89 to 97 Thunderbird. And the reason why I did a ton of research, and the reason why I went with this one is that apparently the travel left to right is a little bit longer than most power steering racks out there. So people will get this rack for older cars that I guess they need that. You know, they would benefit from a turning radius with that being longer. And for example, this one, also this Mustang rack had the inner tie rod extensions, and we've talked about that. This is what I'm all about. So that block right there, that extends the pivot point, which is now here, so that relative to the suspension, we have proper steering geometry. That worked fantastic. Now, I would have to do that on this one as well, because this pivot point is a couple inches shorter on either side, that I would have to extend that. However, this one doesn't fit that, and there's nothing off the shelf with, I guess, the right threading that would work for that, so that'd have to be, I guess, custom made, which isn't a big deal, but kind of an annoyance. But it also turns out the left to right on the Mustang is, I don't know, 4 3/4, 5 inch, something like that. This was supposed to be 6 inch, but it was barely over 5, which is kind of a bummer. And then I got it and started to fit it to the car, and I just made a mistake, I guess, when looking at it online. I didn't see it in person, but there were a couple things for clearance. First of all, which isn't the biggest issue, but the exhaust right there would have to be completely remade, because this goes exactly where that exhaust is, and that was going to be kind of annoying, but whatever, doable, right? And then the biggest issue, though, is I thought that these mounts were going to be, I guess, parallel to the ground, and it turns out that they would be just like that, straight to the bottom, or straight on the bottom. So that would hang that down below my subframe there, and I don't want that. I want that to be the lowest point. Excuse me. I want that to be the lowest point. And sorry, I'm battling a sinus infection here. That wasn't going to work, so I was like, okay, I'll chop off these mounts and maybe reuse those trick clamps and billet aluminum clamps that I have. But then I started thinking about it. I'm like, all right, so I have a rack that doesn't have the benefit that I thought it did. I have to modify the exhaust like crazy. Also, the spline here is different, so I had to modify the steering shaft coming off the steering column. And I would have to completely reimagine the mounts. And the inner tie rod extensions I couldn't find. You know, all these reasons were adding up that this particular rack didn't make sense. So I ended up going with another rack, which is not in yet. And I did better research, I guess. And it is another Mustang rack, but it's from a 2008 Mustang, and obviously it's power steering. And the beauty of it, well, there's a couple things. Obviously it's power steering, which is awesome. I don't have to reuse these things. The mounts will be parallel, so I can tuck the mounts kind of up here for good ground clearance. I do not need inner tie rod extensions because the rack is already wide enough. It's something 30 inches wide, I think, from the pivot point to the pivot point. So the steering geometry will be pretty well maintained, and I should not have any major bump steer issues. The mounts won't be too difficult to make, and like I said, the steering arms will be good to go. These are my hack job-ish steering arms, but are very functional. And what I am also doing is I am not going to reuse these. I didn't really like them. They're kind of shady, but they were something just to start out with, and you know, they bolted up right there. But these still clear the wheels, the standard tie rod ends. And these are from a 3000 GT. Interestingly, they fit both of those Ford steering racks. Hopefully they fit the new one as well. But they'll fit up right there, but there's a little bit of slop, so I got to figure out a way to match this narrower taper in there. That'll be fun, but whatever, that'll do. There's some brake pads. And then I'll, you know, hopefully, I'm gonna act like this is the 2008 rack. Hopefully this won't be the biggest ordeal. I've got the Corvette power steering pump right there. I've been doing a bunch of research on the fittings for the power steering lines. So I know, you know, that's an M16 1.5, that's an M18 1.5, 3/8 return, you know, that's for the stock stuff. And I know the fittings on the 2008 Mustang as well. So, you know, I'll make it work. I'll get some lines. All right, I've talked enough. Gonna change the power steering. That'll be huge for me. So hopefully the brakes are fixed, the clanking is fixed, the power steering is gonna be on, hopefully cooling still goes good, tuning is good enough, exhaust is fixed from the last video, it looks better, hopefully the brakes work and don't stick. There's been a lot going on, and hopefully with all the junk that I'm doing now, it becomes a better driving vehicle and I'll get some true mileage underneath it. I don't know when the next video will be, of course, because I suck at that, but I appreciate the few folks that stick with me on this endeavor, and I'll see you next time.